Contubernium. It is in the channel's name. It is what we call ourselves. You will see why later. But what was it to the Romans? Was it a tiny military unit, or simply a place of rest for the empire's soldiers? Let's find out. We will begin with etymology of the word. Prefix con hints at the word referring to something communal, while the rest of the word, tubernium, clearly stems from Latin word taberna, meaning hut, room, stall, or shop. Tabernae were also chambers in Domus Romana, a Roman house. They were facing a street and were sealed off from the rest of the house, making tabernae perfect rental spaces for merchants and craftsmen to live and work. With this, no wonder that taberna eventually evolved into tabernacle, a small tavern, which was a synonym for contubernium, meaning a legionary tent. None other than Julius Caesar, Julius Caesar, the modern pronunciation of Latin. Okay, that guy referred to his soldiers' tents with both names. Once, in his Gallic War, praising a centurion who, despite his wounds, quote, came forth from his tabernaculum in order to brace up his subordinates. The other reference comes from his Civil War, of which I don't have a physical copy. No matter. There, Caesar described soldiers putting down, quote, their weapons in their contubernium, clearly referring to a tent. Later, Tacitus, you may know him as Tacitus, mentions tents in his writings about many different Roman military engagements, always referring to them as contubernia, a plural form for a contubernium. For example, when talking about Pannonian legions, who were unfortunate enough to live out their duty in close proximity to the enemy. The legions were, quote, cast among savage clans with the enemy visible from their very contubernia. That sounds just horrifying, but also further builds up my confidence that a contubernium was primarily a tent. Could the word contubernium have a second meaning? Was it also a name for a party of men who were sharing a tent? Was such a tent party an official military unit? Well, it's all not so obvious. To begin with, we have the word contubernalis, meaning something like a tentmate. That name was documented in Cicero's. Okay, I will just use modern Latin pronunciation from now on. So, the name was documented in Cicero's legal trial records. There, he once referred to a prosecutor as his contubernalis, from his military past. Now think, what is the possibility that these two shared a tent? The word contubernalis was also carved into gravestones of soldiers. Such graves were often erected by the deceased's brothers-in-arms, who, surprise, surprise, were often serving in a different unit, such as a sentry, or even different branch of the military. This suggests that Romans, by contubernalis, did not really refer to their literal tentmates, but more generally to fellow soldiers whom they met during their time serving Rome. Moreover, there are other words from ancient writing that could be used interchangeably with contubernalis. We, for instance, have commanipularis, a person from the same maniple, or commanupulo, also translating to a co-worker. The primary sources nowhere refer to the tent party as a contubernium, apart from Vegetius, who, if you read his De Re Militari concerning military matters, makes an impression of often being mistaken. Even the part where he describes what a contubernium is should raise an eyebrow of someone who knows a thing or two about Rome's army. Quote, the centuries themselves were divided into contubernia, such that one decanus, as it were, who is called the head of the contubernium, had charge of 10 soldiers living under one tent. The contubernium used to be called a maniple because they fought side by side in combined bands. So, according to Vegetius, in a century we have 10 contubernia of 10 men, each led by a decanus, giving us 11 men per a tent party, with a tent being way too small for 11 people. Okay, back to calculations. This sums up to 110 men in a century. But Vegetius wrote about the imperial era legions, where in a century there were only 80 legionaries. Well, the math does just not add up. Plus, what is that weird bit at the end calling Contubernium a maniple? We know a maniple to be a unit comprising of 2 centuries, not to be a tent party. Other than that, references to a Contubernium being a tiny military unit sharing a tent only appear in the earlier secondary sources, whose authors seem to blindly believe that what Vegetius teaches. If we ignore Vegetius, all the presented evidence points to a Contubernium, aka tabernaculum, definitely being a tent, but not a group of men sharing the tent, and thus forming some kind of a micro-unit. Moreover, contubernales were more generally people who served with one another on campaign, and were thus stationed in the same camp, fort, or any other military facility. It means that a contubernalis was somebody who could have been one's tentmate, but most often was not, being simply a fellow legionary. Calling a tent party contubernium is an approach we use in Roman army reconstruction. The name of the channel is just a transfer from that. This approach helps reconstructors in group development and camp organization, if the roles are given to the right men who are later respected for their engagement. The Vegetius way of thinking works here, even if it is not 100% historically accurate. We also can't be too harsh with Vegetius. After all, his work is the only surviving ancient textbook on Roman military and army organization. I guess respect the sources that you have, and give them the coolest look that your century can offer. Like in this 16th century portrait of Vegetius.
Looking good.
My man!
On the other hand, the scientific approach dictates criticism, for which a reader of Vegetius will have many occasions. Taking that and all presented evidence into consideration, if you want to be historically correct, you can call everybody in a reconstructed Roman military camp your contubernalis. This made me think, and we have decided that from now on, our dear viewers, we will refer to you as contubernalis, members of a growing community of ancient history fanatics. It is all because I love how the reality of a Roman legionary camp presents itself to be. Everyone could have been your contubernalis. As observed, the brotherly bonds were formed across centuries and cohorts. If, in the slightest degree, your life depended on someone, he was called a man worthy sharing a contubernium with. We see you, our dear viewers, with this utmost respect and gratitude. Although there's barely any money that we've made on YouTube so far, it is your views, comments and subscriptions that made it possible in the first place. It further motivates us to create more content, so keep watching, and we will keep feeding you with more and improving videos on ancient military, history and reconstruction. Oh, and the Hirti part. That is just a declination of my Latin last name cognomen Hirtus, used for reconstruction purposes. Thank you for watching, and remember, Roma caput mundi.